The boarding gates at Dallas-Fort Worth buzzed with the usual mixture of impatience, fatigue, and anticipation. Families corralled restless children. Business travelers balanced laptops and coffee cups, and vacationers took obligatory selfies before heading down the jet bridge. To most, it was just another Friday evening flight to Denver, 2 hours of recycled air, cramped legs, and hopefully a smooth landing. Emily Carter stood in line near the middle, carry-on bag slung casually over her shoulder. She looked like any other traveler: jeans, leather jacket, hair pulled back in a loose bun. Nothing about her appearance suggested a past shaped by adrenaline, danger, and discipline. At 34, she carried herself with a kind of understated confidence. That came from years of controlling high-speed aircraft under unforgiving skies. But no one here knew that. To them, she was just another passenger shuffling forward at boarding call. She preferred it that way. Row 12, Seat C, the aisle. She always picked an aisle, preferring the freedom of movement, the easy escape should she need to stretch her legs. She settled in, sliding her bag beneath the seat and fastening her belt. Around her, the cabin filled with the steady rhythm of travelers, claiming their small rectangles of space. To her right, a young couple fumbled with a diaper bag, apologizing to passengers as they crammed it into the overhead bin. Their infant wailed, and the mother bounced him gently, whispering comfort. Directly in front of Emily, a businessman scrolled through emails with practiced intensity, already typing replies before the plane even pushed back. Behind her, 2 college students debated which ski slopes outside Denver were the best, their laughter spilling over the hum of boarding chatter. Emily observed quietly. She always watched, though she never let it show. It was habit, a remnant of her years as a pilot in environments where noticing small details could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Who looked nervous? Who carried themselves with alertness? Who seemed distracted? It wasn't paranoia, just training stitched into her bones. The flight attendants moved briskly through the aisle, stowing bags, directing traffic, reminding passengers to find their seats. Their voices carried that blend of warmth and authority only seasoned crews could master. Emily respected them. People often underestimated how much pressure attendants handled in confined spaces with hundreds of strangers. The engines hummed faintly as power flowed through the aircraft, and Emily leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The vibrations beneath her seat were familiar, almost comforting. She had spent thousands of hours inside cockpits, though those cockpits were far different from this one. Smaller, faster, stripped of comforts, filled with instruments calibrated for war, not convenience. Memories nudged at the edges of her mind, nights flying through black skies over hostile terrain, scanning for threats while listening to clipped radio chatter. She shook them away. That life was over. This was civilian air travel, safe and predictable. The most exciting part of tonight should be whether the beverage cart still had ginger ale when it reached row 12. The intercom clicked, and the captain's calm voice filled the cabin. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome aboard Flight 227 with service to Denver. Our flying time is approximately 2 hours and 10 minutes. Weather at our destination is clear, with light winds and a comfortable 72 degrees. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight. The announcement soothed the restless energy of the cabin. A ripple of movement followed as passengers buckled up, silenced phones, and adjusted vents overhead. The flight attendants began the safety demonstration, their practice gestures pointing to exits, masks, and seatbelts. Few paid close attention. Most assumed nothing unusual would happen at 35,000 feet. Emily, out of habit, watched every detail. She traced the exit rows, counted rows to the nearest door, and noted which passengers seemed oblivious. She didn't expect trouble, but training demanded awareness. Still, She kept her face relaxed, offering no hint of the calculation running silently in her head. The pushback tugged the aircraft onto the taxiway, engines roaring louder now. There, vibration resonating through the cabin. The baby to her right stopped crying, lulled by the steady noise. The businessman in front typed one last message before putting his phone away. Emily glanced out the window across the aisle, watching as the ground crew signaled and vehicles cleared. Takeoff was smooth, a steady acceleration that pressed passengers back into their seats before lifting them into the fading light of evening. City grids sparkled below, the horizon awash with hues of orange and pink. As the plane climbed, seatbelt signs remained lit, though a few passengers reached instinctively for bags or reclined their seats prematurely. Emily's breathing slowed. For the first time all week, she allowed herself to relax. No deadlines, no obligations, just 2 hours suspended above the world, untethered. She appreciated these quiet spaces in between destinations. They felt like pauses in life's constant march forward, a chance to reset. The climb leveled, engines easing into a softer drone. Flight attendants began preparing carts, their chatter drifting from the galley. Overhead, the soft ding of the seatbelt light shutting off triggered a wave of movement, passengers rising, stretching, lining up for restrooms. The normal rhythms of flight settled in. Emily unzipped her jacket slightly, comfort overtaking. Vigilance. She pulled out a paperback, flipping to where she had left off days ago. Words blurred into narrative, and for a while she lost herself in the story, letting fiction replace memory. The book was a habit she had cultivated after leaving. The air forced something to ground her, to remind her of ordinary pleasures. Around her, the cabin had taken on its airborne rhythm. The couple cooed at their now sleeping child. The students behind her argued cheerfully about whether snowboarding counted as real skiing. The businessman leaned back, eyes closed, exhaustion overtaking his earlier intensity. From the outside, it was nothing but an ordinary flight. But Emily's instincts, sharp even beneath layers of calm, sensed that ordinary never stayed ordinary for long. Perhaps it was the way the captain's earlier announcement had carried the faintest trace of strain beneath its smooth delivery. Or perhaps it was simply her own mind, trained to anticipate disruptions, never trusting peace completely. She adjusted in her seat, not tense, but not entirely at ease either. As the attendants rolled carts down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks, Emily smiled politely, declined, and returned to her book. She gave no sign of what lingered behind her calm exterior. Readiness. Years of flight training had ingrained an automatic response to crisis. Even in civilian clothes, even as just another passenger in row 12, the part of her that had once commanded combat missions waited quietly, just beneath the surface. No one else noticed. They couldn't have known. To them, Emily Carter was simply another face among many, traveling from one city to another, living an ordinary story. But the sky often has a way of revealing truths. And on this flight, the calm before was merely a fragile curtain, moments away from tearing. The cabin had settled into its familiar mid-flight rhythm. The seatbelt sign was off, and the aisles bustled with small movements, passengers stretching, children bouncing impatiently at their seats, and attendants maneuvering carts stacked with miniature bottles and snacks. Laughter mingled with the clink of ice cubes tumbling into plastic cups. The hum of engines formed a steady backdrop, a sound so constant that it was almost invisible, the heartbeat of a journey moving forward without disruption. Emily Carter turned another page of her paperback, eyes skimming the lines without truly absorbing them. The words blurred, her mind drifting instead toward the muffled chatter of passengers. She caught fragments of stories, someone talking about a business merger, another about a birthday surprise, a teenager boasting about winning a video game tournament. Normal, harmless noise. She breathed in deeply, letting herself sink into the ordinariness. Routine, she told herself. Safe, predictable, controlled. And the intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice began, calm but carrying an undercurrent sharp enough to catch attention. "If there are any combat-trained pilots on board, please make yourself known immediately." The words, though spoken clearly, hung in the air like something incomprehensible. For a second, silence filled the cabin, as if no one truly believed what they had heard. Forks paused midway to mouths. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Even the child across the aisle stopped fidgeting, sensing the ripple of unease. Emily froze. The captain's request wasn't the kind of announcement passengers ever expected. People anticipated turbulence warnings, seatbelt reminders, or maybe a call for medical assistance. But combat pilots? That was something altogether different, something that hinted at a problem far more dangerous than spilled drinks or a passenger. Fainting in row 18, a baby began to cry again, the sound sharp in the sudden hush. Whispers rose almost instantly, spreading like sparks catching dry grass. What did he say? Combat pilots? Is this some kind of joke? Something must be wrong. The businessman in front of Emily craned his neck, trying to catch the eyes of others, as if confirmation would anchor reality. The college students behind her fell silent, their earlier laughter replaced by nervous muttering. One of the flight attendants stopped mid-cart, lips pressed tightly together, eyes darting down the length of the plane. The intercom clicked again, this time shorter, the captain's voice clipped and urgent. "If you have combat flight experience, please make yourself known to a flight attendant immediately." There was no mistaking the gravity now. His tone left no room for misinterpretation. Something was wrong, terribly wrong up front. Emily's chest tightened. Her first instinct was denial. Someone else would step forward. Surely, in a flight with over 100 passengers, there had to be someone else, another veteran, another pilot, someone trained. It didn't have to be her. She had left that world behind, after all. She wasn't in uniform anymore. She wasn't responsible. But seconds dragged on. No one moved. The silence stretched, thick with hesitation and fear. Passengers looked around, eyes darting toward the aisles, waiting for anyone to stand. But no hands rose. No brave volunteers appeared. Emily could feel her heartbeat pounding against her ribs, a steady drum of memory and instinct. Colliding, she pressed her palms against her knees, grounding herself. Images flared in her mind. The desert, the roar of engines, the split-second decisions made under fire. She had been trained for emergencies, for moments when hesitation meant loss. That training, buried but not erased, stirred like an animal. Waking from sleep, her throat tightened. She wanted to remain still, invisible. Yet the weight of inaction pressed heavier by the second. She glanced at the flight attendant standing near the galley, the young woman's face pale, her hands gripping the service cart too tightly. Their eyes met, and in that unspoken exchange, Emily saw desperation. Not performance, not protocol, real fear. Passengers muttered louder now. A man a few rows up asked loudly, "What's happening? Is the plane okay?" His voice trembled. Despite the attempt at control, Emily exhaled sharply. She knew this silence couldn't last. Her body responded before her mind gave full permission. Slowly, she raised her hand. The attendant's eyes widened with relief as she spotted the gesture. She moved quickly down the aisle, crouching beside Emily's seat. "Ma'am," she whispered, voice low but urgent, "you're a pilot?" Emily hesitated only a second. "Air Force," she admitted quietly. "Flew combat missions." But the attendant didn't let her finish. Her shoulders slumped. With visible gratitude, as if a weight had lifted. "Please, come with me," Around them, passengers noticed the small movement. Heads turned, whispers sharpened. Some stared openly, others whispered behind palms. The businessman in front of Emily leaned sideways to watch, eyes wide with curiosity and fear. The college students fell completely silent. The couple with the baby clutched their child tighter. Emily felt the cabin's attention on her, a heat, pressing into her back as she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. She had spent years commanding aircraft worth millions of dollars, trained to handle split-second crises under enemy fire, yet somehow this walking down a narrow aisle of civilians felt heavier. She straightened her shoulders, her leather jacket shifting as she adjusted the strap of her carry-on. Her boots pressed softly against the carpeted aisle as she followed the attendant forward. She ignored the questions thrown in hushed voices around her. What's going on? Is she going to fly the plane? Are we in danger? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Step by step, a familiar smell of the cockpit grew stronger, the metallic tang of instruments, the faint undertone of heated wiring, the sterile chill of recycled air. Each stride pulled her closer to a space she thought she had left forever, closer to a responsibility she hadn't asked for, but could never truly escape. The curtain separating first class from coach drew back, and the atmosphere seemed to change. Instantly, the chatter of passengers dimmed behind her. Ahead lay the cockpit door, locked tight, a symbol of both security and mystery. The attendant pressed a discreet button, speaking softly into the handset clipped to her uniform. A moment later, the door cracked open, and Emily caught a fleeting glimpse inside, flashing indicators. The tense silhouette of the captain leaning heavily against his seat. The attendant gestured for her to enter. Emily paused at the threshold, heart thundering. She wasn't dressed for this. She hadn't prepared for this. She wasn't supposed to carry the lives of strangers anymore. But she felt the pull, undeniable, the echo of duty. She stepped inside. The door shut behind her with a heavy click, cutting her off from the restless murmurs of the cabin. Ahead lay the truth of why the captain had called for a combat pilot. And Emily, whether she wanted to or not, was now part of it. The cockpit door closed behind Emily with a metallic click, the sound resonating in her chest like a gunshot. The small space smelled of heated circuits, aviation fuel, and the faint musk of human stress. Every instrument glowed with quiet urgency. Green and amber lights blinking against dark panels. Screens flashed data. Warning indicators pulsed in rhythms only trained eyes could decode. The captain, a man in his 50s with lines carved deep across his face, looked up from the controls. Relief swept through his expression when he saw her. His hands, steady but taut, gripped the yoke. The co-pilot, slumped beside him, was pale and unmoving. Oxygen tubing dangled from his seat, useless. "You're the combat pilot?" The captain asked quickly, voice edged with desperation but anchored in professionalism. Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second. She wasn't in uniform. She hadn't worn flight gloves or a helmet in years. But she nodded once. Air Force, F-16s, overseas tours. The captain's shoulders loosened slightly, though his eyes remained sharp with urgency. "Good. I can't hold this alone." Her gaze shifted to the unconscious co-pilot. He was young, early 30s, maybe too young to look so fragile. His chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. A flight attendant hovered just outside the cockpit, explaining in a whisper that a medical emergency had taken him out mid-flight. He wasn't dead, but he was gone from duty. Emily's throat tightened. The scene yanked her backward in time, into memories she had locked away. She remembered the first time she had seen a wingman go down. Afghanistan, 2012. The sky had been ink black, punctured only by the glow of tracers and the flares of explosions below. Her squadron had flown a support mission, providing cover for troops pinned in a valley. Adrenaline coursed through her as she banked sharply, scanning instruments while listening to the chaotic symphony of voices over radio channels. Two's hit. A voice had barked in her headset. Her wingman's plane spiraled downward, smoke trailing. For a heartbeat, the world froze, the disbelief, the helplessness. Then training seized her body, her voice snapping commands, her hands executing maneuvers. There was no time for grief in the cockpit, only action. That night, she had landed with trembling hands, her heart heavier than her aircraft. She had walked away from the tarmac, carrying the crushing realization that even the best weren't invincible. That memory had stayed with her, buried under years of trying to build a civilian life. And now, in a commercial jet thousands of feet above mountains, that same helplessness threatened to resurface. Except this time, she wasn't just responsible for one squadron member. She was surrounded by over 100 civilians, each one oblivious to just how fragile their situation had become. The captain snapped her back to the present. We're stable for now, but I can't handle descent and navigation alone, not with weather building ahead. I need your hands on these controls. Emily slid into the co-pilot's seat. Her fingers hovered over switches and levers, muscle memory sparking, even though the setup was different from the jets she once commanded. Civilian aircraft were bulkier, slower, less nimble than an F-16, but the fundamentals were the same. Lift, drag, thrust, weight. A cockpit was a cockpit, and her training years of repetition was etched into her nerves. Still, doubt gnawed. She hadn't flown in years. Could she still do this? Her reflection glowed faintly in the glass of the instrument panel calm eyes, hiding a storm of doubt. She thought about the passengers behind her, completely unaware of how close they teetered to danger. The mother with the infant, the businessman who lived in his emails, the students planning ski trips, people who trusted the unseen hands up front without a second thought. Her past told her one thing clearly. Trust was fragile, but duty was non-negotiable. She closed her eyes for a brief second, letting the sound of the engines wash over her. It wasn't the shriek of afterburners she had once known, but the steady roar of a massive commercial engine. Different, yes, but still a machine that obeyed the laws of physics, still something she could command. Memories blended with the present. She remembered strapping into a fighter jet for the first time at 23, hands shaking until she wrapped them around the throttle. Her instructor's voice had drilled discipline into her, barking corrections and demanding precision. Every mistake back then had been a lesson. Every mission afterward had been a reminder that mistakes cost lives. Now here, the lessons crystallized. Into instinct, she placed her hands firmly on the controls. Her voice, when she spoke, carried steel. Tell me what we're dealing with. The captain outlined quickly. The co-pilot's sudden collapse, oxygen irregularities, possible systems malfunction. They were flying above the Rockies, weather shifting faster than forecast, storm cells building ahead. He needed help balancing navigation, descent, and communication. Alone, he was stretched too thin. Together, they stood a chance. Emily nodded, absorbing everything. Her heartbeat steadied as focus took over. All right, she said. Let's fly this bird. Back in the cabin, whispers multiplied. Passengers had seen her enter the cockpit, and speculation surged. Some clung to optimism. Maybe she's a relief pilot. Others spiraled toward fear. If they're calling for combat pilots, something's really wrong. The tension seeped through the rows like invisible smoke. The flight attendants did their best. Smiles stretched tight, voices rehearsed but trembling underneath. They reassured passengers without answers, distributing water cups as if routine would mask reality. But no one missed the way attendants glanced nervously at the cockpit door. Inside, Emily's world narrowed to instruments, gauges, and the captain's steady instructions. Her mind, though, remained a battlefield of conflict. She thought of the promises she'd made after leaving the Air Force to live a normal life, to never again shoulder the crushing responsibility of lives on the line. She had worked hard to bury that part of herself under ordinary routines, grocery lists, gym visits, Friday nights with friends. But here she was, the truth pressed down. With undeniable clarity, she hadn't left that world behind. She had only been waiting for it to find her again. Duty wasn't something you walked away from. It lived inside, ready to awaken at the first call. As the plane sliced through the sky, clouds thickening ahead, Emily tightened her grip on the boom. Yoke, her decision was made. She couldn't pretend anymore. She wasn't just Emily Carter, civilian in row 12. She was Major Carter, combat pilot. And for the lives in this cabin, she would be again. The moment Emily slid into the co-pilot's seat, the cockpit seemed to shrink around her. It was a space meant for two, yet it felt as though the weight of an entire world pressed into its narrow walls. Instruments blinked with a quiet intensity, each gauge and dial carrying meaning she had to interpret instantly. The hum of systems filled her ears like a low chant. This wasn't the sleek, stripped-down fighter cockpit she once commanded. It was heavier, busier, almost bloated with technology. But the language of aviation was still one she spoke fluently. The captain shot her a brief, measuring glance. His eyes carried a mixture of fatigue and relief, as though he had been treading water for too long and finally spotted a lifeboat. His uniform shirt was damp with sweat, his collar loose, his jaw tight. Yet beneath the strain, Emily could see the discipline of years in command. He had held this plane together by sheer force of will until help arrived. Name? He asked, voice brisk, almost clipped. Carter. Emily Carter. Air Force. Major? She gave a short nod. Former. Major F-16s, 2 tours overseas. Something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps even trust, but he didn't let it linger. His hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency. I'm Captain Reynolds. We've got a situation. Emily's gaze dropped to the co-pilot. The young man was still unconscious, his skin chalky beneath the dim glow of the instruments. A small oxygen mask now covered his face, secured by the attendant who hovered anxiously in the doorway. His chest rose and fell shallowly, proof of life but not of usefulness. He was gone from this fight. Emily forced her focus forward. What? Do we know? Reynolds exhaled, his voice rough. Co-pilot collapsed about 20 minutes ago. Oxygen irregularities in his system, though cabin pressure stable. I ran checks, no leaks detected, but something hit him hard enough to knock him out cold. Medical help's limited, so he's dead weight until we land. Which means I've been flying solo since. He adjusted a dial, eyes flicking across gauges. We're holding altitude now, but I can't manage descent, navigation, and communications at once, not with weather ahead. I need you in this seat. Emily's hands hovered over the controls, fingers twitching with old instincts. The layout wasn't the same as her fighter jets, yet her body remembered the rhythm. Left hand on throttle, right hand on yoke, eyes dancing between instruments. And horizon. Her training whispered from somewhere deep. Trust the basics. Fly the plane. I've got you, she said quietly, more to herself than him. Reynolds's jaw softened by a fraction. Good, then let's do this. Her eyes swept the panel. Methodically. Airspeed, stable. Altitude, 37,000 feet. Heading, northwest, climbing into thickening cloud cover. Wind shear, moderate but worsening. Radar, pulsing with ugly blotches of storm activity ahead. Nothing catastrophic yet, but the Rockies beneath them promised turbulence that could punish even seasoned pilots. She tightened her grip on the yoke, steady but firm. The hum of engines felt alive, vibrating through her arms into her bones. The civilian jet didn't respond with the sharp, agile obedience of her old F-16. It moved more like a lumbering beast, slower to react, demanding patience. But beneath its weight, there was grace. She could feel it. The intercom crackled as Reynolds contacted air traffic control, his tone clipped but professional. Denver Center, this is Flight 227. Co-pilot incapacitated. I now have a qualified second pilot assisting. Requesting emergency priority. Static hissed before a calm voice replied. Copy that, 227. Priority clearance granted. Weather update. Severe cells building east of the Rockies, moving fast. Recommend immediate course correction. Reynolds turned to Emily. Your call? East or west? She studied the radar. The eastern route was longer, but avoided the worst of the storm. The western route cut time, but punched straight through turbulence that could toss passengers like rag dolls. Her pulse steadied as her combat training surged forward. She had once flown into storms of metal and fire, navigating split-second threats with only instinct and calculation to protect her. Compared to that, this decision felt almost merciful. East, she said firmly. We keep them safe, not shaken. Reynolds nodded approval and adjusted course. The aircraft banked gently, the horizon tilting outside the cockpit window. Far below, the jagged teeth of the Rockies cut across the land like ancient scars. Behind them, the cabin felt every shift. Passengers clutched armrests as the plane angled eastward. Murmurs rippled, nervous questions spilling through the aisles. Attendants whispered among themselves, trying to mask worry with practiced smiles. One attendant returned to the cockpit briefly, her voice low. Captain, passengers are asking what's happening. Reynolds didn't look up from his instruments. Tell them the co-pilot had a medical emergency. Leave it at that. No mention of combat pilots. Emily agreed silently. The truth would only ignite panic. Civilians didn't need to know how close the margin of safety had become. The storm loomed closer. Lightning flashed like distant artillery, illuminating the edges of thick clouds. The cockpit lights dimmed automatically, instruments glowing sharper in the gloom. Emily felt the subtle shift of pressure in her ears as the aircraft entered choppier air. Her body responded instinctively, small corrections on the yoke, gentle nudges on the throttle. She flew with precision, her movements controlled, economical. Reynolds glanced at her once, eyebrows raised slightly. You've still got it, he muttered. Emily almost smiled, but discipline kept her expression steady. Flying's like breathing. You don't forget. Still, doubt lingered in the edges of her mind. She hadn't been in a cockpit for years. Civilian lives weren't the same as soldiers who signed up knowing the risks. The stakes felt heavier. Yet the rhythm of flight began to seep into her veins again, smoothing jagged edges of fear. She belonged here. Her thoughts flicked back to the passengers in row 12. The young couple with the baby. The students laughing about ski slopes. The businessman buried in emails. None of them had any idea who she was, or what she had done before this day. To them, she was just another traveler. But to Reynolds, and to this plane, she had become indispensable. A transformation settled over her like a second skin. She was no longer Emily Carter, woman on vacation. She was once again Major Carter, co-pilot, protector of lives. For the next hour, she worked seamlessly with Reynolds. He handled communications, while she steadied their flight path. The storm battered them with turbulence, rattling the frame, but Emily anticipated each gust, adjusting smoothly. She read the instruments like old friends, interpreting data at a glance. Every decision, every movement, carried the echo of her past missions. Only this time, instead of armed escorts or hostile skies, she had a cabin full of innocents behind her. And she would not fail them. The storm thickened ahead, black clouds rising like mountains themselves. Emily adjusted course slightly, threading a narrow gap between cells. Lightning lit the sky, thunder rumbling faintly, even at cruising altitude. She felt sweat bead at her temple, but her hands never wavered. Beside her, Reynolds exhaled, almost in awe. "You fly like you never left." Emily didn't respond. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, her heart steady now. Inside, she knew the truth. She had never really left. The skies had always been her home. She had just been waiting for the call to return. The aircraft shuddered as another wave of turbulence slammed into its wings. A ripple of gasps rose from the cabin behind them, muffled by the heavy door that separated cockpit from passengers. Emily Carter felt the vibrations course through. Her arms, every tremor translated through the yoke into her muscles. Her grip tightened instinctively, not with panic, but with control. Flying through instability was something she knew intimately. She could read turbulence the way a sailor reads the sea. Her focus sharpened. Airspeed, steady. Altitude, dropping slightly under the storm's pressure. Nose, 2 degrees down. Nothing irrecoverable. "Correcting," she said calmly, adjusting. The yoke with smooth precision. The jet leveled, its nose lifting back into proper alignment. The engines groaned, then steadied. In the captain's seat, Reynolds exhaled audibly, the tension in his shoulders easing. He shot her a glance half astonishment, half gratitude. "You handle this like second nature." Emily's eyes stayed on the glowing instruments. Storms have a rhythm. Once you feel it, you can move with it instead of fighting it. It was the same principle she had lived by in combat skies. Don't resist the chaos, anticipate it. Ride it, use it. The key was precision without fear. Minutes stretched into an hour as they pressed eastward. The storm clawed at them, throwing gusts that rattled the fuselage. At times, overhead bins popped, dropping contents onto startled passengers. Yet, despite the chaos, Emily's hands never faltered. She worked in quiet sync with Reynolds, her voice steady, her movements deliberate. Reynolds handled communication, relaying their progress to air traffic control. Emily remained the backbone of their flight path, guiding them between storm cells. With the instinct of someone who had once danced through anti-aircraft fire, the larger jet felt unwieldy compared to a fighter, but its responsiveness to firm, decisive control reminded her of a powerful animal strong-willed, but willing to follow if the rider earned its trust. It wasn't just the storm she was managing. It was the cabin full of hearts beating in sync with every bump. She could feel them, even though she couldn't see their faces. They were counting on her, unknowingly. Her confidence radiated through the aircraft itself, transforming fear into something survivable. At one point, the storm surged violently, rattling the plane so hard the overhead lights flickered. Alarms buzzed briefly before stabilizing. In the cabin, a child's scream pierced the air. Reynolds cursed under his breath. "We need to descend, but not too fast, or we'll scare them worse." Emily nodded, eyes narrowing as she calculated. "I'll bring us down gradual, controlled." Her left hand slid to the throttle, easing back with care. The engines lowered pitch, the descent beginning. Passengers behind them would feel the shift, but it wouldn't be the gut-dropping plummet of uncontrolled turbulence. Instead, it would feel measured, intentional, almost reassuring. The altimeter ticked steadily downward. Reynolds glanced at her again. "You sure you've been out of the game this long?" "Flying never leaves you," she murmured, adjusting. "Trim. You just stop hearing the engines when you're grounded." As they passed through a pocket of calmer air, Reynolds seized the moment to address the cabin. He flicked the intercom. His voice, though tight, carried authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. You may have felt some turbulence, but please remain calm. We've adjusted course and are descending to smoother air. Everything is under control." Emily listened, hearing the unspoken truth beneath his words. Everything wasn't under control, not yet. But control was what passengers needed to believe in order to stay calm. And so she became the invisible reassurance behind his voice. The hands on the controls that made his promise real. The storm's worst raged on their left flank, lightning flashing like artillery, bursts in the night sky. Emily steered them eastward, threading narrow lanes of relative calm. Each decision required instinct balanced with calculation. Radar could only show so much. The rest was gut knowledge, an ability to read the cloud's movements, the subtle, shifting pressure that foretold violence. As she maneuvered, her mind slipped briefly to memory. The desert skies, night patrols under foreign stars, her fighter slicing through turbulence that wasn't weather, but war. She had led missions with lives depending on her precision. Back then, failure meant comrades lost. Now it meant families destroyed. Her jaw tightened. She wouldn't fail. Time seemed both endless and fleeting. The rhythm of adjustments, calculations, and course corrections drew Emily into a flow state where fear had no foothold. She almost forgot she was on a civilian jet, almost forgot the rows of passengers behind her. She was back in her element, where clarity reigned and action meant survival. Reynolds broke the silence after a while. "It's been years since I've flown with someone who makes it feel this steady. You've got more control in this storm than I've seen from half the new captains I've trained." Emily allowed herself a faint smile. Compliments didn't matter much to her, but they told her something important. He trusted her now, fully. And in the cockpit, trust was oxygen. Another jolt rocked the plane. Warning lights blinked altitude fluctuation. Emily corrected instantly, banking slightly right, trimming the nose. The alarm silenced. Reynolds gave her a sidelong glance, as if marveling at her reflexes. "You catch things before the system does," he said. "Machines react. Pilots anticipate," she replied. It was a lesson drilled into her bones from the first days of training. Machines would always be slower. A good pilot flew one step ahead of the data. Gradually, the storm began to thin. The clouds lightened, the radar less cluttered with angry red. Still, the battle wasn't over. Weather patterns were shifting unpredictably, and they still had miles to cover before safety. But Emily could sense the aircraft settling beneath. Her responding to her control as if acknowledging her command. Behind them, passengers began to quiet. The screams subsided, replaced by murmurs and nervous laughter. People clung to the idea that the worst had passed. They didn't know that their calm came not from luck, but from the woman in row 12, who had stepped forward when no one else did. For Emily, the hours in that cockpit were more than survival. They were a homecoming. She hadn't realized how much of herself she'd buried when she left the service, how much she missed the hum of engines, the precision of flight, the responsibility of command. Now, with every decision, she reclaimed that part of herself. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for the simple, profound duty of keeping others alive. As the plane pierced through another thinning bank of clouds, a strip of moonlight illuminated the cockpit window. Emily's reflection stared back at her, calm and resolute. For the first time in years, she recognized the person she saw. She was a pilot again. That realization steadied her further. Whatever awaited storm, malfunction, or worse, she was ready. The skies might be unforgiving, but so was she when lives depended on it. Captain Reynolds leaned back slightly, attention in his posture easing. His voice carried a note of something rare, genuine gratitude. "I don't know what we'd be facing if you hadn't been here," he said. Emily's hands remained steady on the controls. Her eyes never left the horizon. "We don't ask why we're here. We just fly." And fly she did, commanding the skies, carrying every soul aboard with the strength of her hands and the unyielding calm of a soldier who had never forgotten how to fight. The horizon was no longer a horizon. It was a wall. Through the cockpit glass, the night sky dissolved into a towering fortress of clouds, thick and angry, rising like mountains from the earth itself. Lightning carved jagged veins of white across the blackness, momentarily illuminating vast columns of vapor that looked alive, like beasts writhing in the dark. The radar confirmed what their eyes already knew. The storm ahead was no simple obstacle. It was a living threat, sprawling, shifting, unpredictable. Emily Carter felt the heaviness in her chest. This was no longer turbulence they could outmaneuver with clever steering. This was confrontation. Captain Reynolds leaned forward, scanning the radar, his jaw tight. His hand tapped rhythmically against the throttle, an unconscious tick of tension. "That's not a storm cell," he muttered. "That's a system, spanning east to west." Emily narrowed her gaze. No gaps? Not big enough for a commercial jet. The silence between them deepened. She could feel the implication pressing into the cockpit walls. Going around wasn't an option. Their eastward detour had bought them some stability, but now, whether they liked it or not, they were funneled toward a storm that didn't care about their clearance or their priority status. Reynolds finally spoke the truth aloud. "We're going through." Emily inhaled slowly. Going through meant surrendering the illusion of control. Pilots didn't conquer storms. They survived them. The question wasn't how to win, but how to endure without breaking. The first gust hit like a punch to the side of the plane. The fuselage groaned, metal flexing under invisible fists of air. The cockpit shook, instrument needles jittering violently. Emily's hands steadied the yoke, countering with smooth, precise adjustments. Behind them, the cabin erupted with gasps and cries. A drink cart toppled in the aisle, scattering plastic cups. The attendants scrambled to secure themselves, voices raised but controlled. Reynolds opened comms again, his tone calm but clipped. "Denver Center 227 entering storm system. Experiencing severe turbulence. Requesting updated vectors." Static hissed, then the controller's voice filtered through. Tense, but steady. 227, radar confirms high-intensity storm activity across your projected path. Best guidance. Maintain altitude 33,000. Heading 075. Minimal clearance available. Good luck, Captain. Emily heard the words unspoken in his voice. "You're on your own." The storm swallowed them whole. Wind shear slammed them from above, shoving the nose downward. Emily yanked the yoke back with both hands, fighting gravity's sudden betrayal. The altimeter spun downward 33,000. 32.8, 30-2-6. "Stabilize," Reynolds barked. "I've got it," Emily snapped, gritting her teeth. She pushed throttle, adjusting trim, forcing the aircraft back. On climb, the engines roared, straining against the weight of the atmosphere pressing them down. The nose lifted, altitude steadying. The plane leveled with a groan, shuddering as if relieved. Reynolds glanced at her, eyes wide but impressed. "Hell of a catch." Emily's knuckles whitened against the yoke. Her voice was calm but firm. "We're not out of it." Rain slammed against the windshield in sheets, wipers swiping furiously. Almost useless against the torrent. The sound was deafening, a constant assault. Every few seconds, lightning illuminated the cockpit, casting Emily's face in stark relief, her jaw clenched, eyes narrowed. She flew not with aggression, but with patience. Overcorrecting was death in storms like these. Every movement had to be measured, responsive, but not panicked. She treated the jet as she once treated her fighter, like an extension of her own body. The turbulence worsened. The plane bucked like a ship in a hurricane. Overhead bins popping open, belongings spilling onto the floor. Screams carried faintly through the cockpit door. Emily forced herself not to hear them. Distraction was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her memory betrayed her for a moment. A flashback, sharp and unwelcome. Desert skies. A night patrol cut, short by enemy fire. The cockpit of her F-16 rattling as missiles traced arcs of death across the horizon. Her wingman's voice in her headset, panicked, cut short by static. She blinked hard, refocusing. This was not combat. But the feeling, the responsibility, the razor's edge between control and chaos was the same. She tightened her grip. "Stay with me," she whispered to the aircraft, as if coaxing it like a wounded animal. The jet responded, shuddering, but obedient under her hands. Reynolds adjusted a dial, voice raised over the storm. "Winds shifting south. We'll take cross shear in 10 seconds. Emily adjusted instinctively, angling the nose. The jet lurched violently sideways. Passengers jolted against seatbelts. Loose items clattered down the aisles. But Emily had already countered, rolling the wings just enough to cut the slide. "Good correction," Reynolds said, almost in awe. Emily's breathing steadied. "Read the storm. Don't fight it head-on. Flow with it." She could feel his respect growing with every decision. He wasn't the only one commanding anymore. They were equals in this fight. Another flash of lightning, closer this time. The sky outside the cockpit turned white for a heartbeat, and plunged back into darkness. Thunder cracked so close it rattled the glass. The storm's violence surged. Alarms blared, one after another, shrieking warnings of altitude instability, airspeed fluctuation, potential stall. Reynolds silenced them quickly, knowing they only distracted from what they already knew. They were at the mercy of the storms. Power. Emily forced her focus to narrow. One gauge at a time. One adjustment at a time. Ignore the noise. Fly the plane. Her voice cut through the chaos, calm and absolute. "We're holding. We'll get through this." She wasn't sure if she said it for Reynolds, the passengers, or herself. Minutes dragged into an eternity. Every second demanded full attention, every gust requiring correction. Sweat rolled down Emily's temple, but her hands never slipped. Reynolds worked in rhythm beside her, feeding weather updates, adjusting systems, cross-checking navigation. They had fallen into unspoken synchronization, their roles merging seamlessly. In the cabin, panic ebbed and surged. Attendants called for calm, strapping themselves in when the worst jolts came. A baby cried without pause. Prayers whispered in multiple languages. Yet the plane flew on, resilient under Emily's command. She thought of the irony. No one back there knew her name, knew that the stranger in row 12 was now the wall between life and death. And that was how she preferred it. At last, the radar began to change. The dense red blotches gave way to yellow, then green. The storm was thinning. The worst was behind them. Emily exhaled slowly, her shoulders finally loosening. She guided the aircraft into calmer air, the turbulence easing, the hum of the engines returning to a steady rhythm. Reynolds leaned back, wiping his brow with his sleeve. That was one hell of a storm. Emily allowed herself the smallest nod. "And we're not done yet." He arched a brow. She gestured toward the forward radar. Ahead, through thinning clouds, the faint glow of runway lights beckoned. But the storm had left its scars. Winds were still high, visibility poor, and their descent would test every ounce of precision they had left. Her voice was steady. resolute. Now comes the hardest part. We have to land this thing. And as she said it, lightning flashed once more in the distance, as if the sky itself was warning them the battle wasn't finished. The storm had loosened its grip, but victory was far from certain. Through the cockpit windows, the night sky revealed its scars-dark clouds still shifting like restless giants, lightning flickering distantly. Below, through gaps in the gloom, Emily Carter glimpsed the faint, scattered lights of civilization. The ground was close enough to remind her how far they still had to fall. Captain Reynolds adjusted the comms, his voice controlled but tight. "Denver Center, this is Flight 227. We've cleared the storm front. Requesting vectors to emergency runway." The controller replied, after a pause that felt like hours. 227, Roger. You are cleared for emergency approach at Denver International. Runway 34 left. Winds gusting 28 knots from the northwest. Visibility reduced to 4 miles. You are priority 1. Reynolds turned to Emily, eyes heavy. It's your choice, Major. You've been flying her this long. Do you want the landing? Emily's chest tightened. Landing wasn't just another maneuver. It was the point where skill and fate shook hands. Fighters were forgiving in their own brutal way, sleek, responsive, built to take punishment. But a commercial airliner was a lumbering beast carrying hundreds of fragile lives. And tonight, the runway wasn't a friend waiting with open arms. It was a narrow lifeline, slick from rain, lined with crosswinds eager to tear them sideways. Her hand flexed over the yoke. She thought of the passengers' families, children, strangers, who never knew her name. Then she thought of the oath she had once taken, a promise that never really left her. She nodded once. I'll land her. Reynolds didn't argue. He only leaned back slightly, giving her the space, his trust absolute now. He would monitor systems, call out numbers, manage what he could, but the descent belonged to her. Emily adjusted the autopilot settings, then disengaged with a firm switch. The plane belonged to human hands again. Her voice was steady, professional. Flaps 20. Begin descent. The altimeter wound downward, the hum of the engines lowering. The aircraft tilted nose first into its glide path. The ground, once distant, began to rise steadily to meet them. Speed check, Reynolds called. Airspeed 180 holding. The descent rate was steep but controlled. Emily's senses sharpened, her world narrowing to instruments, horizon, and feel. Every vibration in the yoke, every hum in the engines, told her something. She listened with her entire body. In the cabin, passengers gripped armrests, knuckles white. Some prayed aloud, voices trembling. Others sat frozen in silence, eyes closed tight. The attendants moved quietly, checking belts, securing loose items, their own fear hidden behind the masks of professionalism. No one told them the full truth, but everyone knew. Landings were always the most dangerous part of any flight, and this was no ordinary descent. Row 12 sat in oblivion of its own significance. The aisle seat empty now. A stranger had risen from it hours ago and become their unseen savior. The runway lights glowed faintly ahead, distant fireflies in the night. Emily adjusted her angle, lining up with the guidance systems. The wind buffeted them, cross-shear, tugging the nose sideways. She countered with firm precision, right hand steady on the yoke, left hand easing throttle. Winds shifting, gusting 29, Reynolds warned. I see it, Emily replied. She banked slightly, correcting the drift. The runway realigned in her view, though the rain streaked against the windshield blurred its edges. Altitude 3,000 feet. Gear down, she ordered. Reynolds flipped the switch. A heavy thud reverberated through the plane as landing gear extended. The cabin shuddered, the change in drag slowing their descent slightly. Flaps 30. The wings adjusted, catching more air, creating lift even as they descended. Emily's mind broke the sequence into manageable fragments. Control speed, align nose, counter crosswind, stabilize. The steps were automatic, drilled into her long. Go. Yet this was no training drill. The difference between precision and error was measured in lives. 2,000 feet. The runway lights grew brighter, aligning in neat lines through the storm. The rain intensified, hammering the fuselage, streaking the cockpit windows. The plane jolted as a gust shoved them sideways. Warning chimes sang, altitude fluctuating. Passengers screamed behind them. Emily gritted her teeth, correcting instantly. Her voice stayed calm, commanding. We're on course. Reynolds called numbers, his voice taut. Airspeed 170. Altitude 1500. Stabilizing. She eased the yoke, adjusting throttle, her every nerve tuned to the aircraft's mood. It fought her with stubborn weight, resisting, but she refused to yield. 1,000 feet. The runway loomed larger now, glowing brighter, but crosswinds tore at the wings with vicious strength. The aircraft tilted, passengers crying out as they felt the slide. Emily countered, banking left, holding the nose steady. Her arms ached with the force, but she didn't falter. Reynolds's voice cracked slightly. Winds gusting 31. She's dancing hard. I've got her, Emily growled. Sweat stung her eyes, but she blinked it away. The plane responded, leveling just enough. 500 feet. The ground was rushing up now. Emily's heart hammered, but her hands remained steady. She narrowed her world to one thought. Land clean. The crosswinds shifted again, shoving hard. From the side, the nose veered. She corrected, sharp but smooth, fighting to keep alignment. Too much drift. Reynolds shouted, not yet. The plane's nose realigned with the runway centerline. She forced the yoke with every ounce of strength she had, her body straining against the machine's resistance. 200 feet. The runway was clear in her sight now, lights glowing like salvation. Speed 150, Reynolds called. Emily nodded. Perfect. The ground screamed closer. Her focus was razor-thin. Align, hold, trust, 100. Feet. The crosswind shoved again, violent. The plane tilted, wheels misaligned with the runway. Alarms blared. Emily's voice was iron. Hold with me. She banked hard, aligning nose and wheels at the last second. The jet screamed toward. The ground metal groaning under stress. Now, she shouted. Impact. The wheels slammed onto asphalt with a bone-rattling thud. The fuselage jolted, passengers thrown forward against belts. Tires screeched, smoke rising as rubber burned against slick runway. The aircraft bucked, fighting to break free of control, but Emily held firm, braking gradually, keeping the nose. Aligned, the storm tried one last time, gusting hard, but she corrected, refusing to let it own her. The plane slowed 200 knots, 150, 100, until finally, mercifully, it rolled at a crawl. The storm was behind them. The runway stretched beneath their wheels. They were safe. In the cabin, silence hung for one heartbeat and erupted into cheers, sobs, applause. Strangers embraced, tears spilling freely. Relief cascaded like a flood. Through every row. In the cockpit, Emily released the yoke, her arms trembling with exhaustion. Her breath came heavy, her chest tight, but her eyes were steady. Reynolds looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. All gratitude. And something else, a recognition that tonight he had shared a cockpit with someone extraordinary. You just saved them all, he said quietly. Emily shook her head, voice low. We did. Outside, Emergency crews raced alongside the taxiing jet, their lights flashing across the rain-slicked runway. But inside, in row 12's empty seat, lay the story no one else would ever fully understand. Emily Carter, combat pilot, had gambled everything in a storm and won. The aircraft slowed to a crawl, tires rolling over wet asphalt, each rotation carrying them closer to the terminal and further from the storm that had tested every ounce of skill Emily Carter possessed. Emergency vehicles flanked them, lights, spinning in a chaotic kaleidoscope across rain-slicked tarmac. The roar of engines dulled to a low hum, and for the first time in hours, the cockpit allowed the silence to stretch. Emily leaned back in her seat, letting her hands fall from the yoke. Her muscles ached as though she had run a marathon in place, her knuckles still pale from grip. Every nerve in her body pulsed with exhaustion. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet satisfaction, a recognition that, despite fear, she had not faltered. Reynolds exhaled heavily, shoulders relaxing in a rare moment of vulnerability. "Major, Emily, I don't think words can." He let the sentence hang, unspoken. He didn't need to. Emily shook her head, voice calm, almost understated. "It wasn't just me. You were steady the whole time. We did it together." The emergency crews moved aside, allowing the jet to reach the gate. Passengers stirred, murmurs spreading like wildfire through the cabin. Some were crying, others clinging to each other, relief etched into every line of their faces. The attendants began opening overhead bins and helping passengers with seatbelts, their smiles exhausted but genuine. Row 12 had become empty once again. Emily's seat was unremarkable, yet she had carried more weight than anyone could imagine. A quiet hero, unnoticed by most, but indispensable in the moment that had demanded everything. The cabin doors opened, letting in the night air, and the faint aroma of rain and asphalt. Passengers filed out slowly, stepping onto wet tarmac, illuminated by flashing lights and the soft glow of emergency crews. Many glanced back toward the cockpit, curious, searching for anyone, to thank for the miraculous landing. But Emily remained in the shadows of the cockpit steps. She wasn't looking for applause or recognition. She had done what she had to do, and that was enough. Still, some passengers lingered, faces pressed to the glass, eyes wide. A mother clutched her baby tightly, whispering soft thanks. A businessman gave a nod of acknowledgement, unspoken but profound. Teenagers exchanged wide-eyed glances, realizing they had just witnessed the skill and courage of someone extraordinary, even if they didn't know her name. Emily watched them, feeling the full weight of responsibility lift slightly. She hadn't saved herself. She had saved them. And for now, that was enough. Captain Reynolds finally exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "You know," he said softly, "most people don't get to see the sky this way. Most people don't get to touch it with hands like yours. You were phenomenal." Emily's gaze fell on the controls, the throttle, the yoke, instruments now still and calm. She touched them gently, almost reverently, feeling the connection she had once feared lost forever. Flying, it never really leaves you. It waits for the moment you're needed. He nodded, understanding without asking. There was an unspoken bond between them now, forged in hours of turbulence, lightning, and unrelenting pressure. Shared survival. As passengers disembarked, Emily finally stood, stretching stiff limbs. She didn't linger for cheers or attention. There would be interviews, news reports, maybe even accolades, but none of that mattered to her. Duty had always been its own reward, and tonight she had honored it fully. Walking down the jet bridge, her leather jacket damp from rain, she passed rows of passengers. Some smiled awkwardly, grateful. Others simply stared, trying to comprehend the ordeal. Emily returned a small nod to each, a gesture of reassurance and humility. She had become a quiet presence in their lives, a guardian whose name they might never know, but whose actions would resonate in memory. The child from row 12 tugged at her mother's hand, glancing briefly toward her. Emily smiled softly at the child, eyes meeting the innocent curiosity of someone who had no idea how close they had come to danger. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a simple human acknowledgement of connection. Outside, the rain had eased to a gentle drizzle. The storm's fury was fading, leaving only puddles reflecting the flashing lights of emergency vehicles. Emily stepped onto solid ground, taking a deep breath of the cool, fresh air. The world felt heavier now, yet more alive. Every sound, the distant honk of a vehicle, the murmur of conversation, the patter of raindrops seemed vivid, sharper, more precious. She walked past the line of passengers, unnoticed by most, but she didn't mind. Recognition was fleeting. The impact of her actions was eternal. She had carried hundreds safely through chaos, and that was a triumph beyond applause. Captain Reynolds approached, holding a tablet with flight logs and notes. "You've earned your rest," he said, voice low but firm. "The plane, the passengers, they're all here because of you." Emily shook her head, offering a quiet smile. "It's not just me. It never is." He nodded again, as if understanding something deeper, that heroes are rarely solitary. That courage is often collaborative, even when the world only sees one name. She paused by the jet's stairwell, looking back once more. The storm clouds had dispersed, leaving the night sky clear, stars faintly visible above the lingering haze. Emily's reflection shimmered in the wet tarmac, tired but resolute. A woman who had stepped forward when called, who had embraced responsibility without hesitation. For a long moment, she simply stood there, letting the events of the night settle within her. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving clarity in its place. She had faced fear, chaos, and the raw power of nature, and emerged not just intact, but transformed. The quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled settled in her chest like a warm stone. This was the life she had once left behind, and yet, she realized, it had never truly left her. She had only needed the right moment to answer its call again. As she descended the final steps to the terminal, Emily felt the presence of the storm recede entirely, replaced by a profound calm. Inside, passengers began dispersing, some turning toward families, others toward transport. Few knew the full story, but all had felt the invisible hand guiding them safely. Emily Carter, once a pilot of combat jets, had flown a commercial airliner through a tempest that might have broken lesser hands. She had commanded the skies, protected the innocent, and returned quietly to the earth without fanfare. That was enough. She walked into the terminal, blending seamlessly with ordinary travelers, carrying extraordinary memories. Her story would be remembered silently in the lives she had saved, in the hearts of passengers who didn't know her name, and in the knowledge that courage often appears in quiet forms. She was no longer just Emily Carter. She was a guardian, a pilot, a woman who had answered the call when it mattered most. And in that quiet victory, she found something she had not known she had been seeking, the profound peace of knowing she had done exactly what she was meant to do. The night outside was calm now. The storm was gone. And Emily walked forward, carrying her quiet heroism into the world, unseen but unforgettable.